You have to put yourself out there, Jasper. I thought Belmont Hollow was all about community.
Dead Male is a 2024 horror thriller from writer-directors Joe DeBoer and Kyle McConaghy, starring Sterling Mesa Jr., Thomas Boykin and John Fleck, who I spent the whole movie scratching my head wondering where I'd seen him before and was delighted when I discovered it was...
An impressive display, Captain.
And...
Doctor, I would like to have a word with you on another matter, in private.
And...
That's one commodity I don't keep in stock. I suggest you look elsewhere.
And...
How long has he served with you? Almost 4 years. I want you to kill him.
Glorious. Dead Male's plot centers around a plea for help that finds its way to the Peoria County Dead Letter Office, and a relationship between a hobbyist synthesizer engineer and their well-to-do benefactor. An example of nonlinear storytelling as well as analog horror, it is possible that a viewer more used to mainstream Hollywood genre filmmaking may find Dead Male a demanding or unfulfilling watch. Resolute in its slow pacing, and with the most obviously traditional lead having a much smaller role than it initially seems they would. Like much analog horror, it thrives on an 80s aesthetic, but not one that particularly reflects the cinema of the time, although you could certainly argue there are stylistic similarities to early Cronenberg or late 70s ultra-low-budget independent horror in general. It's more about wallowing in a retro-tinged mood, and while I would hesitate to call it slow burn, a lot of the plot beats happen fairly early. It does force a viewer to sit, often uncomfortably, through its moments, a pool of dread whose steady currents drag you towards its deep end. If you haven't seen Dead Male, you should probably seek it out if you're going to before continuing this video, as while there will be spoilers, I won't be slavishly recounting the plot, but instead discussing the film and its themes, assuming any viewer of this video will have already seen it themselves. So if you would rather watch the film before that, which I recommend, it's on Shudder. Enjoy. Before I go on, I'm going to direct you to another video on this film from one of my favourite creators on this platform, In Praise of Shadows, who covered this film on their second channel, IPOS Dark Sides. It's a great video, you should check it out if you're at all interested in this film. Now I will confess that when that video popped up in my feed, my reaction was, let's say, expletive-laden. Not because I wish any ill will, but because I was working on this video at the time and I was very worried that Zane would say what I intended to, making my potential video redundant. Zane focused in on one aspect of the film, the Hitchcockian psychosexual relationship at its core, and I was somewhat relieved that this was the focus, as I'd basically not intended to talk about that aspect much at all. It's certainly there, although I feel it is far less overt than Zane's video made out. For me, the psychosexual plot was a layer, a pulpy narrative to hang the film from, but not the point, just as its retro-aesthetic focus on quaintly dated analog synthesizers and the motif of Male itself were layers that build to a wider point, which frames all of the above. Because what Trent, and really all of the male characters in the film, actually lacked were not lovers, but friends. This, for me, is a film very much fixated on male loneliness, on being and feeling isolated, about barriers that we put up around ourselves are placed around us and we place around others.
But hey, we've all failed at something. Hell, that's why a lot of men are here.
Dead Male is a film that is an hour and 41 minutes long, and I haven't gone back and tabulated exactly how much time two male characters actually appear on screen together, but it isn't a lot. They instead drift alone down sterile corridors and strangely deserted grey urban areas, while the framing of the character who is abducted and trapped is barely different from that of the characters who are apparently free to leave their confines. Even the title carries a double meaning. Dead Male. Get it? And this is very much a film about men, not glamorized in the fetishistic way of Hollywood, but average Joes in late middle age, lifetimes lost shown in wrinkles or greying hair, all seemingly largely alone. Thomas Boykin's Jasper, a dead letter Sherlock Holmes with the skill and drive to make connections happen for others, while seemingly having few himself.
Jasper was no social butterfly.
Largely isolated at work, save for a chummy but professional long-distance telephone relationship with a computer whiz spy. Eating alone outside his place of employment, the sole constant in his life which he orbits like a satellite, and living at a male refuge, where he equally finds it hard to forge relationships.
And do you intend to be an active member of the Belmont Hollow community?
Yep.
His colleagues fetishize him, either treating him as a rock star to be in awe of, or a precious commodity to be locked away and kept isolated until his work is complete.
We gotta keep both doors closed and locked.
Uh-huh.
while Sterling Mesa Jr.'s budding synthesizer engineer Josh is lost to his hobby, living alone and eating a diet of ready meals. His sole glimmer of community coming from magazines where those of like minds offer tips on their shared obsession, and a dream that his toil will one day lead to being in that inner circle.
Always been a dream of mine to get in with one of the marquee makers.
Is that so?
Come to this stage of life, you want to make a mark.
While his patron and later captor, John Fleck's Trent, is a man of considerable means, but no one to share that with, vast stretches of his home laying bare, while the areas he utilizes are monuments to a past he keeps reliving and a future that never came. His own skill being a dab hand in the kitchen is taken for granted, as he thoughtlessly and gracelessly consumes his creations alone, hoarding his favorite indulgences, while fetishizing the skill of others, a commodity he too only seems to desire to hoard and consume. And perhaps the way the characters eat is telling too. Food, a symbol of shared culture and community to the extent that breaking bread is literally linked with communion, but here eaten alone, either absent-mindedly solely sustenance, or a gross indulgence. Trent shoveling food into his mouth hoping it causes his brain to release enough serotonin and dopamine to ease his pain, or later, as a lonely literal Last Supper. In each of their ways, these men are as damaged and broken as the undeliverable mail that finds its way to Jasper's desk, seeking connections that elude them, lost and drifting through a system. There is a sort of truism for a UK-based view of American films that often, but not always, themes of race in the media of the United States can be broadly substituted for themes of class in the media of the United Kingdom with barely a skipped beat. There are one or two examples that illustrate that point, how the working-class rag-and-bone men of Steptoe & Son became the African-American salvage peddlers of Sanford & Son, or perhaps more seriously the character of the Candyman, originally depicted as a white man in Clive Barker's The Forbidden, a short story that trades in themes of class segregation in major cities, and set on a Liverpool council estate, becoming the African-American Candyman of the film series, set in the housing projects of Chicago, reflecting the racial realities of economic segregation in the United States. To be clear, this is inexact, an oversimplification, but its inexactness aside, it's something that always lingers in the back of my mind when watching American cinema, and it leapt out to me here, watching a well-to-do white man entrapping a black man, coercing him to do his bidding, and how that dynamic is mirrored in the Dead Letter Office itself, as Jasper is locked away every day by a white man, the overbearing and fastidious Brooks, a large keyring reminiscent of historic jailers swinging from his belt.
We're pushing the guidebook by congregating here.
Set to work that must apparently be carried out in pristine isolation under tight security. Jasper left pretending he can't unjam his photocopier, just to have a few seconds of friendly human contact. This dominion, this control, white men who either metaphorically or literally isolate and force these black men to work. One whose dominance comes from his means, attempting to first buy control, then coerce it. The other through the hierarchical structures of the workplace, presented here as its own kind of lonely cage. So whether this dynamic is class or race, and I think it's both, it's another example of arbitrary barriers we place between each other, that loneliness is often not purely down to individual choices, but also socially constructed and enforced, often by ourselves, a feeling ingrained in us that we can't have community with those from a different strata, a different job or different social, racial or economic backgrounds, persistent power imbalances with fetishizing and othering two sides of the same coin. While male loneliness has been very effectively co-opted by the modern right, with the blame often placed on the boogeyman of feminism. The social critic Bell Hooks was talking about the damaging impact of patriarchy on men 30 years ago. There is a left-wing feminist lens for this issue. And maybe that lens is reflected in women characters ending up as the effective heroes of Dead Male, that the two female characters, despite often being patronized by the men around them, share a much closer bond than any male characters seem to, an emotional availability, empathy, and support for each other that enables them, together, to achieve more than they could as individuals, helping others with no thought of material gain, perhaps subtly hinting at intersectional solutions. Although it is also telling that a "Where Are They Now" epilogue card reveals that instead of a reward for saving a life, Mickey Jackson's Anne met with punishment for breaking the rules. by so squarely dating itself from the bedroom hobbyist synthesizer engineer to Mail itself, both largely swept away by electronic advancements in the decades since. The film is asking us to ponder its larger themes, to ask if these human conditions have changed in the same way the challenges faced by these characters have. If you incorrectly address an email, something startlingly unlikely thanks to address books and predictive text, you get a bounce back. If you want a perfect organ note and a synthesizer, there are a vast myriad of options in the era of software and sound cards. You can pick whichever is in your budget and receive it the next day. But men are still lonely, still divided by hierarchies of oppression, still unable to make connections, still focusing on minutiae as a substitute for true community. And that, by the way, is what I think the glue represents. That it is a meaningless nothing over which these men are able to bond. Get it? Just like friendly office banter or a love of analog synthesizers are. But minutia, like the epoxy, is only a temporary fix, an adhesive in lieu of the bricks and mortar of a true relationship, easily undone by bitterness like a dab of vinegar. And maybe we can go even deeper, as Trent, as much as anything, is an obsessed fan, controlling, entitled, believing he has the right to chain a creator to a project they wish to move on from, believing his vision alone should be that which is shared, any deviation corrected by whatever means he deems necessary. And maybe that reflects fandoms today. Lonely men forging weak bonds over flimsy nonsense, clinging to some childhood fantasy they wish to relive over and over, creating cages of expectation and entitlement.
This is the very least.
That I can do for you as your partner.
Dead Mail may be about loneliness, but I think its central motif of dead letter offices does offer us some hope, as it does literally in the narrative of the film. The very existence of these offices working hard against seemingly impossible odds to ensure that those who want to connect can, even when mistakes are made, shows us that there is always hope, that we can find ways to communicate with each other. Isn't mail itself symbolic of interaction, of community, of building understanding, tied to the articulation of deeper thoughts and more weighty expression, bridges that cross seas of distance and loneliness? And didn't no less a philosopher than Kevin Costner
It's me.
make a 3-hour post-apocalyptic film espousing that very theme? He did, and it was really bad.
Does anybody know what PS stands for?
Or, with a little less irony, W.H. Auden's 1935 poem Night Mail, highlighting the power of mail in forging communities beyond class boundaries. Letters for the rich, letters for the poor, the shop at the corner, the girl next door, ending with the refrain, "And none will hear the postman's knock without a quickening of the heart, for who can bear to feel himself forgotten?" Or Thomas Pynchon's 1966 novel The Crying of Lot 49, which makes a similar argument about mail being the connective tissue of societies, through a typically paranoid conspiracy that threatens to undermine it, or maybe doesn't exist at all. And does it really need undermining anyway, or is the whole idea laughable enough to be a central spoke in its satire? Lot 49 is a novel that may have become far more interesting in that regard than Pynchon actually intended, not just through technology changing the way we interact, but as Donald Trump threatens to privatize the United States Postal Service, something which has already partly happened in the UK, as the profit-making arm, the Royal Mail, was sold off, and post offices themselves were largely franchised, leading to mass closures, particularly in more isolated communities where there is less profit to be made. And maybe that is somewhat evoked in the title too. Dead mail, that this type of deeper connection is being lost. And while I can't say I'm personally nostalgic for physical mail, I can't remember the last time I licked a stamp, it's fair to say that is something that would be felt most by those with fewer options, trapped in different ways. Maybe those from older generations who may not be digitally competent, or in remote or rural areas that often have outdated or non-existent infrastructure due to, again, a lack of profit to be made in improving it, as well as the very poorest often not having immediate internet access. For example, the estimated 15 to 20% of the UK living in digital poverty according to research done by the Good Things Foundation charity. Maybe that's being overly literal about the title though, a title, by the way, which is so brilliant on so many levels. Dead Mail. It's just so great I'm amazed no one has made a film by this name before, especially when Death Bed is already a thing. But I also particularly like the way the title centers the word mail, almost as if that letter were a character in the film, and, perhaps, metaphorically, it is. Mail that may be too far gone, too damaged or broken, or possibly even mail that itself doesn't want to be delivered. And maybe sometimes it takes someone else making a superhuman effort to see that it arrives where it needs to. But it can be done. This may be a film about lonely men who are themselves trapped or damaged, but it also tells us that these pieces of communication, little bits of ourselves that we give to others in the hope that they will give something of themselves in return, they'll reach their destination eventually. Every letter can find a mailbox. Every cry for help can be heard. The only true dead mail that will never reach anyone else, is that which is never sent. Thank you very much for watching. You made it all the way to the end, which is awesome. Thank you. If you saw Dead Mail differently to me or have other feedback, please feel free to comment below. I love hearing other people's theories or people filling in gaps that I've missed, and I do try to respond to all your comments. If you enjoyed this, don't forget you can like and subscribe and all that nice stuff, and check out some of my other videos if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.